Right now, inside American evangelicalism, there are two really powerful and honestly conflicting stories being told about what it means to be a man. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down both of them. One is this vision for restoring masculine leadership, and the other, well, it's a stark warning about how that very same vision can go terribly wrong. It really all boils down to one central question, doesn't it? This is the question that's driving so many sermons, books, and movements. What does it actually mean to be a strong man in our culture today? And the two sources we're looking at, well, they offer radically different answers. So, the first perspective argues that our whole culture is in a crisis. And why? Because we've rejected traditional masculinity. Millicent Sedra puts it this way. She believes society has literally told its protectors, we don't need you, and has been criticizing the very men it needs the most. But then you have this, a real world example of a pastor who built a gigantic following on this exact ideal of strong, masculine leadership, only to have it all come crashing down under the weight of his own domineering style. And that's a direct quote from his own church's findings. This right here, this is the core tension we're going to explore. Okay, so let's dive into that first perspective. It doesn't really start with a solution. It starts with a diagnosis. This belief that our culture is suffering from a deep, widespread crisis of masculinity. According to speakers like Martin and Millicent Sadra, the root cause is feminism. Their argument is that it has systematically relabeled masculine strength as toxic, that it's made it okay, even normal, to disrespect husbands, and that it's basically flipped our cultural values upside down, celebrating what they call effeminate men while mocking traditional ones. And the result, in their view, it's bad for everybody, leaving women struggling to find the kind of partners they're looking for. And you really have to get this next part because it's key to their whole argument. From this viewpoint, feminism isn't pro-woman at all. In fact, they see it as anti-woman. Why? Because as Cedric claims, it devalues feminine roles and tells women that their worth only comes from acting more like men. All right, so if that's the diagnosis of the problem, what's the fix? Well, this perspective says the answer is to return to a very specific, divinely ordained blueprint for men and women. So this blueprint, it lays out these really distinct roles. You've got the husband as the head, the one who leads, who protects, and who is ultimately held responsible by God. And then you have the wife as the helper, supporting her husband, praying for him, and submitting to his leadership, which in turn creates the space for him to actually fulfill that role. Now, here's a super important point in their theology, the distinction they make between function and value. The argument is that submission isn't about being less than. It's about having a different role or a different function within the family. It does not mean, they argue, that one person is less valuable or worthy than the other. And this quote from Martin Sedra really gets to the heart of what they see as the payoff of this model. He points to his own marriage as proof that it works, saying their happiness comes directly from the fact that they've both embraced their distinct, God-given roles. Okay, so now we have to pivot because to really get the whole picture, you have to look at this other story, a real cautionary tale. And that's the story of Pastor Mark Driscoll, a guy who built one of the biggest church movements in America on a very, very similar vision of this muscular, assertive Christianity. I mean, for years, Mark Driscoll was this strong leadership model brought to life. His church, Mars Hill in Seattle, just exploded in popularity. Thousands of people were drawn to his style. It was raw, it was unapologetic, and it was very, very masculine. But as you can see, that incredible rise was followed by a pretty stunning fall. After all that crazy growth, a pattern started to emerge. He consolidated his power. There were some really questionable financial decisions, accusations of plagiarism, and it all came to a head with a formal rebuke from his own church that forced him to resign. So let's zoom in on what was actually happening. Power got centralized around this small, hand-picked group of loyalists. $250,000 of church money was used to basically game the system and get his book on the New York Times bestseller list. Then, serious allegations of plagiarism started popping up. And his sermons, I mean, they contained stuff so shocking it became infamous, like the time he told a woman Jesus commanded her to perform a specific sex act on her husband. And this quote, which a former staffer shared, really captures the change people were seeing. The mission of the church, it started to feel secondary to the pastor's own fame, his personal brand. It went from being a movement about Jesus to a project about Mark. And look, this wasn't just something people on the outside were saying. This is from the former head of security at his next church. He described this huge gap between the public message, it's all about Jesus, and what he says was the private reality, which was all about Driscoll. But in the end, the most damning verdict came from inside his own organization, his own board of overseers. The very people meant to hold him accountable, they issued a formal finding. And they didn't just point to one mistake. They cited a pattern of sinful actions and specifically called out his arrogance and his domineering leadership style. And this is what it all comes down to. This is the central tension in this whole thing. What is the difference between strong, protective leadership and abusive, domineering authority? And maybe more importantly, where is the line? So you can almost see it as two competing models, right? This table kind of lays it all out. On one side, you've got the ideal of protective leadership we heard about earlier. It's about empowering people, serving a mission, protecting others, and being accountable. And on the other side, you have the cautionary tale of what happened at Mars Hill, which was marked by coalescing power, becoming a vanity project, bullying critics, and creating an atmosphere of fear. And look, this is why this is about so much more than just one pastor or one church. The core dilemma these two stories throw at us is universal. How can any group, whether it's a church, a company, a family, how can you encourage and build up strong, principled leaders without accidentally creating an environment where that same strength can sour into abuse? So that leaves us right back where we started, with this one huge, lingering question. It's not just a theological question, it's a deeply practical one for anyone who is a leader or is under a leader. Where exactly is that line?